Hey everyone, Nathan Hudson here, founder of Perceptycs, where we are building the #1 growth agency for subscription apps, in my biased opinion. Now, in this video, I'm going to break down the pros and cons of web-to-app funnels for subscription apps, depending on what stage the app is at, to help you figure out whether or not it makes sense for you to begin investing in web-to-app funnels and help you understand some of the nuances around the topic. Now, this is actually the first video I'm putting out as part of a new series on web-to-app funnels, so there will be a lot more content on this topic because there is a lot to discuss. But let's get started by aligning on what web-to-app actually is, because I think a lot of people get this wrong, and I think this is going to help for the rest of the video. So a lot of people put web-to-app in a box, and I think that's because they start out by defining it incorrectly, shall we say. Now, here's what I define web-to-app as. Web-to-app refers to the process of converting traffic on the web or starting to convert traffic on the web before directing them to your app, right? So if you think of the typical user acquisition journey, whether it be organic ASO, Apple search ads, Google UAC, campaigns, Meta app promotion campaigns, TikTok, whatever it may be, you are taking people from wherever they are, typically searching or on social media, directly to their App Store listing for them to download your app and start a subscription or make an in-app purchase. Now, when we speak about web-to-app, we mean that we aren't going to send traffic directly to your store listing. We're going to send traffic to the web first. Whether that's a website, landing page, or web application, it is to the web and not to the App Store or Google Play Store. And then, from the web, we are either going to do some stuff with the users or direct them immediately to the store listing. More often than not, we're going to do a lot of stuff with the user on the web before taking them to the store listing. So there are some additional steps that happen. Now, there's a few different ways this can be done. And that's part of the reason I said people put web-to-app in a box. Because at the time of making this video, which is October 2024, the most common form of web-to-app funnel goes something like this. You take traffic, send it to a landing page to learn about the benefits of your product or explore their pain point in more detail. People then start an onboarding journey on the web, so they go through a survey or quiz. They then are presented with a paywall or product description screen, right, selling your product, and then you take payment. They make a payment on the web, they create their account on the web, and it's at this point that you direct them from the website to the App Store to download the app. From here, they can sign into their account they just created and access the subscription or content they've purchased. That is the typical web-to-app flow that 95% of the time people are talking about when they say web-to-app. But this is just one type of web-to-app funnel. Right. We're going to cover other types of the funnel later in the series, but I wanted to make this distinction now because I think it's very important to identify one thing. That you can run web-to-app funnels where people purchase on the web or where people purchase in the app. It's still web-to-app, right? But for the purpose of this video, when we're talking about the pros and cons, I'm referring to web-to-app funnels where you are making the purchase on the web, because there are a lot more nuances and benefits to talk about, and it would be a really short video if we were just talking about web-to-app where people end up purchasing in the app. Side note, some people actually distinguish between these two by calling them web-to-app or web-to-web or web-to-web-to-app. Hey, in my opinion, they're all web-to-app funnels. They just major on solving different problems and serve slightly different purposes. So let's dig into this. The obvious next thought is, okay, so should I be thinking about running a web-to-app funnel at my stage? If so, what are the upsides? What are the downsides? So let's dive into them all. I want to make this blanket statement first. For the majority of subscription apps, it shouldn't really be a question of whether or not you build web-to-app flows. In most cases, you should most definitely be running web-to-app funnels at some point because there are so many pros, as we're going to get into, right? The real question is, to what extent should you invest in your web-to-app funnel over your core direct-to-app funnel? And the second question is, to what extent are you going to see better results through your web funnel than you are your app funnel? right? These are the things that actually matter and we actually need to understand. But before we can cover those things, we need to actually understand the benefits, the pros, the cons, etc. So rather than just listing all the benefits, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through the different stages that you might be at and the different pros and cons that apply to mobile subscription apps at that stage. Okay, so it's important to do that because they change over time. And most of the time, whenever I've seen lists or people speak about pros and cons, there's just a blanket, here are the pros, here are the cons. I even have an article that I wrote for Revenue Cat where I spoke about the pros and cons, and it was just, one blanket list. I think that's great, but it's more nuanced, it varies, so let's go into it. So let's start with new apps. If you have a brand new app, right, brand new, you've done some organic ASO, maybe you're spending a little bit on Apple search ads, and this is primarily your focus, and this is the game you're playing, you don't need to focus on web to app flows. Why? Because you don't have any external traffic that you're playing with yet, right? Your focus is the App Store. So what you want to focus on are your screenshot tests and getting your ASA converting better for you. You don't want to start launching a web to app flow when no one's actually going to go to it. But the moment you start thinking about spending on other traffic sources, specifically paid social, or typically when people start out, it's going to be on Meta or TikTok, but it could be Google, it could be affiliate partnerships, it could be influencer partnerships, whatever. The moment you start thinking about directing other traffic sources to your app to acquire users, this is when you seriously want to start considering web to app funnels, specifically those where the purchase is made on the web. Now, these benefits and cons really apply to apps that are making anywhere from 10K to 100K MRR. Yes, it's a huge range, but from the teams that I've worked with in this range, not that much changes typically, right? The team size is going to be fairly small and doesn't need to grow that much in this stage. You're probably going to be spending the large majority of your ad spend on one channel, and if you're not, I would encourage you to do so. So there's that. So let's actually dig into the benefits. Benefit number one, payback period. In my opinion, the number one benefit for running web to app funnels for early stage mobile apps who are starting out on paid social or testing different channels is to reduce the time it takes for you to actually get your money after spending it. I'm specifically talking about the time that it takes for you to receive your money as a developer or publisher. So depending on when a user subscribes and if it's on Apple or Google Play, you'll have up to a 60-day wait time from the moment the person's actually paid for your product till when the stores actually pay out and you receive your money. 60 days up to, right? For early stage budget constrained apps who often don't have enough budget to test paid social properly anyway, this makes things almost impossible, right? Like imagine you have 10K in spend and you spend it in 1 month. You now don't have any money to fund testing or growth in month 2. So now you have to spread your spend over 2 or 3 months, but that means that you're spending more like 3K per month. So you're going to learn slower, test creative slower. You probably won't reach scan thresholds if you're focused on the US, depending on seasonality and other factors. Your campaigns are going to really struggle. Now, yes, with AEM or Meta, it's less of an issue, but you still have this huge wait time, right? You still have to wait to get your money back, and it's going to impact your cash flow. Fortunately, your web payment process won't do that. So depending on the region, you could receive your money the same day, which is great. And it's ridiculously beneficial for cash flow. You're going from a 60-day wait time to a same day. Now, granted, if you're running a trial, it's not literally going to be the same day that you spend it, because you're going to have to wait for people to go through that trial. There are going to be some that cancel, etc. But when the user actually makes the payment and the money comes out of their account, you're going to receive it same day. That is a huge benefit. The second benefit that I put second when a lot of people may have put it first is because, in my opinion, cash flow is the most important thing for any startup, but especially for mobile apps, right? Now, nevertheless, one of the most spoken about benefits of web to app funnels, which I'm calling benefit number 2, are the reduced fees that you end up paying. One of the big challenges with trying to be profitable as you spend and as you grow a mobile app is that everyone wants a piece of the pie, especially the stores. Google, Apple, they want 15%. Sometimes they want 30%. Hey, and you're a consumer subscription app, so you're going to have to pay 20% of that anyway. Ouch. You're like left with nothing. Now, anyway, if you run a web to app funnel, you pay a much smaller fee of 2 to 3% to your payment processor, which is ridiculous, right? It means you're reducing fees by up to 10x, right? It's 10 times. It's very, very significant because it means you don't have to be as good at things like creative testing or onboarding experimentation or paywall optimization to be profitable. You have a little bit more room. Now, I caveat that with the fact that it's typically harder to convert on the web for a variety of reasons, so you still need to be good at what you do. But with these kind of reductions in fees, there's a high chance your net return on spend will be higher. And of course, you're going to benefit with renewals and not have to really consider that. Now, with reduced fees, the more you scale, the more impactful this is, right? Because with Apple, you pay 15% up to your first million in that year of new revenue from new users. Beyond that, in the same year, you're going to pay 30%. So if you're making 10 million from new user revenue, 9 million of that you're going to pay 30% on, 1 million of that you're going to pay 15% on, which, it becomes painful. So at scale, it makes a lot more sense to run Web2App. And we're talking about smaller apps, but it's still a massive benefit, okay? So it's only going to get better. The third benefit is on the attribution side. Scan and ATT are a minefield. You have to hit privacy thresholds. There are delays in data, up to 72-hour wait times. You can't get granular data on the creative level. There are just so many things that make running direct to mobile user acquisition really difficult if you don't know what you're doing. Now, if you have an amazing team of user acquisition managers and experienced UA managers who understand this stuff, no problem. But if you're an early stage app just launching in this phase, testing meta, chances are you're not in that situation and you may not have that person on your team. You may either be running Meta or TikTok or whatever paid channels yourself, or you have someone on your team who's doing it, but they may not have a lot of experience in mobile apps. Either way, when you run web-to-app funnels, attribution becomes infinitely easier to manage. You basically become the same as any web subscription product and can test a lot more easily. So you can get downstream conversion visibility beyond the trial to make better decisions long-term in Mixpanel. You can use your UTM tracking. You can see what people are doing beyond the trial and how they're converting. And you can track that back to creative levels. Net, a huge win. Now, as you scale, this becomes less of a benefit to an extent because you'll already be able to reach privacy thresholds. But I think the fact that you can be more precise on what creatives are working without, complex campaign structures, and you can increase downstream visibility are still massive benefits. Now, there are other benefits. Absolutely, there are other benefits. But I think these are more relevant for apps at the upper end of this bracket and above. So I'm going to cover these when we talk about scaling apps. For now, I think these three benefits of cash flow or payback period, but let's call it cash flow, reduced fees, and attribution are the main benefits, in my opinion. Now, it's not all good news, right? There are definitely some cons. Now, the biggest con, the most obvious con, is the amount of resource required to actually build these funnels. Whether that's hiring additional developers, hiring a web developer, paying for certain tooling, however you slice and dice things, there is going to be an additional cost, especially for getting things up and running, because you're going to need to invest time to get the funnel right, like to map out the designs and the wireframe, right, and figure out what you want the UX journey to be like. Then you're actually going to need to build this stuff. And it's not a one-time cost because you're not going to launch a profitable web funnel from day one. Hey, maybe you will. There's a chance that you will. But I wouldn't put my money on the fact that you will, or that anyone will. Otherwise, no one would have a job. Anyhow, you're going to continually be putting resource towards testing and iterating on the web, right? This is just what's going to happen. So this is probably the biggest issue for small apps getting started because chances are you're resource constrained anyway, and you don't have excess cash or excess development time that you can just throw at web funnels. You're probably really prioritizing and being careful, and now you're looking at web, weighing it up, and it's like a huge cost up front. Is it going to make sense for you to do? It is a con. It is something to think about. There's no getting around it. For larger apps that are making solid profit, right, or even apps making 50k MRR plus, this isn't a big deal because there are tools out there that you can most definitely afford if you're making that revenue and you've got a somewhat lean team, and they're cost effective. And the amount that you're going to pay, you're probably going to save in reduced fees anyway, so it's worth it. What I would say is that the fees scale, but the costs don't scale as much, right? So if you were to hire a team dedicated on the web funnel, you can scale that funnel a lot. And if you're doing it in app, the fees are going to increase. The amount you pay each month is going to be higher. When you go from making, 10K a month to 100K a month to 500K a month to $1 million a month, the amount you pay in fees is going to be a lot more than if you were to build something yourself and have a team running it, and then you pay the smaller fee on web. So there's that. Now, the second con is you're going to need additional resources to manage the customer relationship too. And I think this is a big one. Managing the payment relationship between you and the customer. This means dealing with chargebacks and refunds. That's mainly what I'm talking about here. Now, not only do you need to expect refunds, but you need to manually issue them, right? If you're using Stripe, you need to manually issue the refunds. People can request the refunds, you have to issue them. There can be disputes. And yes, whilst payment providers like Stripe make it easy to issue the refunds, it's still something extra to do that you wouldn't have to do before. And most importantly, if you're getting too many chargebacks and issues, you can have your account shut down, which is painful, right? I know people years ago were doing drop shipping and so many people would get their account shut down because their service just sucks. And hey, if we're honest, a lot of people nowadays are putting out really crappy apps and just pushing spend to the app and they're going to get a lot of refunds. This could be a problem for you. So if you have a bad app and it sucks and no one likes it, don't run a web funnel because you're going to get refunds. And then you're going to get your Stripe account shut down and then it won't be good. But assuming you have a good product and you've been working on it and it does what it says on the tin, absolutely, it can be mitigated. But again, you still need to deal with those refunds. There are other cons, as I said, absolutely. But I think at this stage, these are really the ones you're going to have to grapple with. So to summarize, for smaller apps getting started with paid social, in my opinion, it's a no-brainer to test Web2App as soon as you can. Dedicate resource to proper web funnels. Some people this may be at the 10K MRR point. For other people, it may be closer to 50K, may depend on your funding, but you should absolutely be launching Web2App funnels. And I'd argue in the large majority of cases, when you start your paid acquisition, the first time you ever launch a campaign should be through a web funnel and not to the app, for the reasons that we've discussed. The benefits of creative testing, attribution, reduced fees, cash flow. If you're starting right now and you're right, I'm going to launch meta campaigns next month, what should I do? Do web, okay, web2app. Now, let's talk about apps that are slightly bigger, right? Scaling apps. Again, I'm going to give a massive range and you're going to be like, what's this guy talking about? But I'm talking now about apps that are doing 100K to around $1 million MRR. Of course, your situation is going to vary if you're at 100K versus $1 million MRR. Yes. However, I think this bracket's going to make sense when you understand the benefits and how they change, what your focuses probably are at the moment. And yeah, I think this is, again, it's a ballpark, but still. Typically, at this stage, you're going to be spending a lot more on paid advertising. At some point in this period, you're going to begin testing multiple channels. You'll have profit or funding to be able to dedicate resources to multiple channels, and that's what you're going to do. And you'll have resources to dedicate to Web2App. So, what changes? What pros? What cons? Well, let's start with what doesn't change, right? What stays the same? Reduced fees is still a benefit, even more so as you'll be reaching the 1 million in new subscription revenue at this stage in a year. Payback period or cash flow, still a benefit, always is going to be a benefit. Attribution, still a benefit for the same reasons. You won't have the benefit of, not having to fight scan because it probably isn't going to be as much as a problem, or at least the privacy thresholds that most people struggle with. But there are other scan issues to deal with. But there is an added layer of complexity when we talk about attribution now, which is cross-channel and cross-platform attribution. These become really painful. To kind of summarize this, there's a halo effect of people who see your web ads searching for your app on the store. So you run a whole lot of traffic to the web. Some people click and they purchase. Some people click and then don't purchase. Some people don't even click and they go and search for your app on the store. But you're going to see an increase in organic search traffic from people searching for your app if you're running web campaigns. You're going to see it with any spend, but when you're doing direct to app and web to app spend at the same time, it becomes a mess because you've got cross-channel, you've got your Google going to the web, your Google going to app, you've got your Meta campaigns going to web, Meta campaigns going to the app, maybe TikTok going to, it just becomes a mess. Can this halo effect happen the other way around? Sure, but it's nowhere near as common in my experience. the more channels you add, e.g. when you go from Meta only to Meta and TikTok, then Meta, TikTok and Google, the more complex things become. And as I said, especially if you're running web and direct to app. So if you're currently in a position where you're only running traffic straight to your app and you're like, should we run web funnels now? Hey, the benefits apply, but you're going to need to pay attention to cross-platform and cross-channel analysis. And your spreadsheets are all going to change and things are going to get complicated for a bit. It becomes a bit of a pain. But that's something for you to weigh up. Now, resource allocation is still definitely a consideration, but at this stage, probably less of an issue. I'd argue that you're doing so much on the app side and product growth side that having a dedicated web team or having dedicated resource focus on the web funnel will probably make everyone's life easier, because you're not fighting over prioritization. Like, we want to do this on the web, but no, we want to run this on the app. So if you can just allocate resource to focus on web and focus on app, maybe you can run things smoother. Hey, maybe that works. I've seen it work in some cases. And the con of managing the payment relationship still applies. Still need to manage your relationship with the customer. But there are some nuances and some things change. Firstly, a new benefit I want to highlight is speed of experimentation. At this stage, it's a lot faster to test on web than it is on app. You don't have to deploy a new release to the store to run an onboarding test or a paywall test. Now, of course, there are tools where you can run paywall and pricing tests, but if you want to switch out your entire onboarding flow or add 3 screens and you want to run this as an A/B test, you're going to typically have to do a release, unless you've got some crazy remote config set up. You're going to have to do a release to push that new onboarding live, and then it adds some time. So doing this allows you to move faster. Now, if you're being really savvy, you're probably like, well, doesn't that apply to smaller apps anyway? Like, if I'm at the smaller stage, isn't that still a benefit? Technically, yes. But in practice, and in my experience, when you're doing this, it's less of a benefit at a smaller stage, because you're limited not actually by speed in most cases, but by budget. There's only so much you can test anyway. If you've got 10K a month monthly revenue, even if you were able to chuck 10K a month, all of it into paid advertising, and assuming there were no cash flow issues, you're still only going to be able to test so much, right? So you can only run so many creative tests and so many onboarding tests and paywall tests to reach statistical significance. So you have more time to actually prepare the tests and work on the tests. Now, if you're using a tool like FunnelFox, which I suggest you check out if you're looking at running web to app funnels, you're going to save engineering time, which means you're going to speed things up. Essentially, you can use the tool, you can have your growth team run and own the experimentation process on web. And unlike a smaller app who isn't going to have enough budget to run the tests, you can run the tests at a really high velocity. So rather than engineering time being a blocker and slowing you down, it's not. And you can now run a lot faster on web than you can in app. So that is, a massive benefit. And yeah, you can run significantly more tests. You can run multiple funnels at the same time. You no longer need to rely on your developers, which your developers will love, your marketing team will love, your growth team will love, everyone will love. Cool. So what are the other benefits? The other one I want to highlight at this stage, which arguably is a bigger benefit than the first one, I think at this stage they're all good benefits, is the control and customization that you're going to be able to have over your funnel. You essentially have total control over the entire user journey, from checkout page customization, customization of the funnel, lead magnets, freemium experiences, playables, content, pricing, plans, offers. You set the rules, right? There is no gatekeeper policing the web like there is a gatekeeper policing the App Store. And I guess the best example of this is if you are at this stage, you're a scaling app, I'm 100% certain that at some point you will have had your app rejected from the store at least once or multiple times because of either screenshot issues, paywall issues, monetization problems, right? You didn't display the offer in a way that Apple wanted you to, and now you have to completely change things or play games to actually get your release approved. Hope no one from Apple's watching this. This is never going to happen on web. Right? There's no one policing. You can display your pricing however you want. You can use whatever CTAs you want. You can control the price because there's no one policing it, which means you can really push the boat out and run some, more edgy experiments to drive up conversion. A great example of some customization that I like to talk about is building a custom onboarding funnel based on the creative. Add creative 1 has message 1, that leads to landing page 1 with the same message, which leads to onboarding funnel 1 with the same message, leading to the checkout focused on the exact transformation that was identified through the onboarding funnel, pushing them with the exact same value proposition. Oh, that you can't really do in-app. To an extent you can, right? If you identify things in onboarding, you can show them a specific paywall, sure, and presumably at the time of making this video, right, with the new CPP deep linking functionality, technically you can do this, but deep links have been buggy for a long time. Currently, not everyone using iOS can support this functionality. It doesn't work for everyone yet. So it's still an advantage that really comes from web. Now, we'll explore this in way more detail in future videos because the possibilities are endless. I have loads of examples to show you. There's content and different things you can do to make it really fun. But for now, just know that the customization and control you have, specifically when it comes to monetization, but also for coherent journeys, makes a massive benefit of Web2App. The third benefit at this stage is control over the customer relationship and payment. Hang on a minute. Didn't I just say that this was a con? Yeah. What changed then? Basically, when you control the customer relationship and you're small, it can become a little bit painful, and there's probably not that much you're going to be able to do anyway with the fact that you control the relationship. The only thing that's really going to change is now you've got to deal with chargebacks. As you scale and you're testing more things, you can get smart with how you deal with refunds, right? You can do cross sales, down sales, upsells. You can do money back guarantees. You own the payment relationship and there's no one policing the store. So there's a lot more fun that you can have. There's a lot more things you can experiment with, right? Winbacks. Specifically, you can extend larger discounts to users because you didn't have to pay a fee. So you can convert them at a higher price on web, and then when they cancel, you can extend a larger discount to keep them because you're not going to pay that in fees. So instead of keeping it, you can pass it on to the user, or you can pass it on to the user that cancels. Now, some of these things you can absolutely do in app, right? Upsells, cross-sells for sure. But there is a certain smoothness that comes to doing it on web, and I think the hypothesis at the moment is that people are prepared to spend more on web than they are in app, which contributes to these things working so much better on web, right? If you look at a lot of products out there, they have huge upsell flows on web that you just don't really see in app. Maybe something for everyone to test, but at the moment it's something that's working well on web, so is an advantage worth talking about. Worth mentioning as well, which some people do. Now, I'm not suggesting you do this, right? It's pretty black hat, not up my street, this particular thing, but people are doing it, so you should be aware of it, is making it really hard for people to cancel their subscription, right? Not sending reminders when trials end, things like this. Having to make them jump through hoops and contact support and show proof that they've actually used the product, etc., to cancel the subscription. Now, there is legislation in certain countries and states now preventing this, but for some publishers, historically this has been a benefit, and for certain developers, publishers in certain regions, this is still something you can experiment with. As I say, you can get really dark with this. Don't do that, but if you do things the right way, it can be an advantage for you. So what about the cons? The cons for apps at the 100K MRR plus mark. The number one con I want to talk about is cross-platform attribution and analysis. Now, we already spoke about cross-platform attribution, but cross-platform analysis also becomes tricky at this stage. You probably don't have dedicated analysts working around the clock to dive into your data. You might do, and you probably will do as you get to the upper end of this threshold, but as you're starting out, 100K a month, 200K a month, monthly revenue, you might not, and it may be something your growth team is doing as part of their role. With web2app, you'll see that different things work on web than work on app. Different pricing works on web, different plans, different offers, different trials, different onboarding journeys. You'll see different trial to conversion rates, right? You'll see different, if you call it click to trial rates, different activation, retention metrics. Everything's different. It's not the same. So when you analyze experiments and dive into profitability, you need to separate out web and iOS. It's not, impossible to do by any means, but it is painful and it is tricky if you've never done it before, and it is something additional to juggle. And especially if you're testing your different plan lengths on web versus app, and you're trying to figure out like your in-week profitability, and you're trying to predict, your ROAS based on lifetime value, which is changing across platforms, it can be real tricky, right? So there is definitely an analysis overhead to consider. Should it stop you? No, but it is worth being aware of and worth preparing for really seriously, right? And being cautious about what experiments you run first on web, and at the right time, making sure you have the right team members who can run these analysis to actually help you grow the app. So the other con that comes into play here is around tax. There are different tax obligations to consider in different countries, different regions, different states even, right? VAT is mainly what I'm talking about specifically. Now, Apple make things really easy for us when it comes to managing tax. But at this stage, 100K MRR plus, there's a strong probability that you're generating revenue from multiple states, let alone multiple countries, which means this is something for you to bear in mind, right? It can be really bad for you to be making, these different revenue amounts in all these different regions, states, countries, and not be paying attention to your tax obligations. So take it seriously, really consider that. Maybe what you want to do is you want to focus your web efforts in a specific region first, which you were going to do anyway, right? But be really careful about scaling into different regions via web because of this consideration. The final con I want to talk about are the scan issues that can come from splitting spend across web and app. Now, as I said a minute ago, if you're watching this at the moment and you're already running direct to app and you've never tried web to app, there are two cons to watch out for, specifically related to these issues around spend on both. The first is, depending on how much budget you migrate to web to app, you may run into ATT, scan attribution issues, and learning phase issues. I guess we could essentially call these threshold issues, right? Like you're now not getting enough installs per campaign for you to see your, conversion events to optimize your AEO campaigns. You're not reaching the learning phase anymore because you've taken budget away and you've put it somewhere else. Now, not a problem for very long, and you can definitely shuffle around your account structure to minimize this, but it can be the case that you no longer reach these thresholds if you move too much spend too soon into web. So keep this in mind, move things slowly. The second con, which again is related to moving spend from app to web, is what can happen to your ASO rankings. Now, your ASO rankings will take a hit if you're spending a massive amount on direct to app and you move your entire budget or the majority of your budget to a web funnel. If you're spending 100 to 300K monthly plus on a direct to app campaigns and you spend it on web, you're going to see your rankings drop reasonably quickly on the organic side. And the reason for this is because the flow and the user journey have completely changed. If you think about a direct to app funnel, everyone installs your app. Installs are essentially a vanity metric, right? No one optimizes for them. No one cares about them. CPI, cool, whatever. It's an indicator, but it's not what I'm focused on. Install velocity is super high. Install volume is super high. Install volume and velocity are signals that Apple use to determine ASO rankings. And because there are so many installs, you get a lot of ratings and reviews, another signal that Apple uses for organic rankings. Imagine that we now slash this spend overnight and pour this into web. What's going to happen? The only people that install our app, other than the few that are going to come from the halo effect I spoke about earlier, which probably is going to net the same anyway, you're going to see a lot less installs because the only people that install your app are going to be those who actually purchase. And if 5% of your landing page views end up converting, it's roughly, give or take, 70% net less installs, depending on your product page conversion rate. So install volume drops drastically. Install velocity plummets. New rating volume drops and velocity plummets. So you may lose, may is being nice. You're going to lose some core positions to competitors if you do that. So what that means is you're not necessarily going to want to move budget, a lot of it, maybe some, but rather you want to add new budget to web as you scale beyond this point. So what's the verdict for scaling apps? Again, if you ask me, it's still in most cases going to pan out sensible to run web to app funnels. Not only do you benefit even more from reduced fees, but there's so much opportunity unlocked on the experimentation side, right? The freedom from customization and control being the biggest advantage here. You can experiment a lot faster in wild ways and really edge out ways to increase profitability. And like I've kind of discussed, you can avoid most of the cons too if you just run web to app in a smart way and you're really careful about what you're doing. The cross-platform analytics and attribution is going to be the biggest issue and biggest headache for you at this stage. So treat that with some care. Consider how you're going to tackle that issue. Now, the caveat at this stage, before we move on, is you're going to want to start testing direct to app versus web to app, right? You're not going to want to just be doing one or the other. You need to figure out what's more profitable and what isn't. Ideally, the ASO issue aside, incrementality testing is going to be the way to go here. But again, there are some things to consider there. Point being, it's possible to avoid a large majority of the cons here by working across both, right? You have a more balanced approach to growth. Cool. So that is scaling apps. Finally, let's speak about large apps, right? What do I mean by large apps? Now, I'm talking apps that are doing 15 million annual recurring revenue plus, right? Up to, let's say, 100 million annual recurring revenue. Beyond that, you probably aren't watching this video trying to learn if your app's doing 200 million annual recurring revenue. If you are, thanks for watching. These will still apply for you in some cases. But anyway, this is a huge range, but I think for the sake of this video, this bucketing system is fine. Feel free to disagree with me in the comments if you're an app at this scale. But yeah, so again, what stays the same? Not much changes, to be honest. All the benefits from the previous stage apply and become increasingly relevant, right? The fees become way better. Maybe cash flow isn't such a big issue, right, at this point in time. But most of the benefits become relevant. Customization and control is super beneficial because you can run a lot more experiments. And there are some new benefits that I want to touch on. Benefit number 1, audience expansion, right? Now, this is a benefit that would apply to some of the larger apps in the scaling stage, but I left it here because otherwise there wouldn't be much to say about larger apps, since most of the benefits still apply. Now, audience expansion. What do I mean? At this stage, you'll be spending a lot on paid advertising, in most cases. You may even be looking to isolate specific channels that you can't isolate if you're running direct-to-app campaigns. For example, Google search, right? I'm talking about web search, right? Searching on the web for a product. You can't run Google web search for like PPC search ads for apps the same way. You just can't do it. YouTube ads, you can't isolate them in direct-to-app campaigns, but you can with web to app. You can literally just scale YouTube as a channel and have YouTube run separately and have Google search run as separate channels. Now, depending on your product and your niche, your category, your market, this may be a benefit way earlier on for you, right? Depending, but for large apps, it's definitely a win because at this point you're looking for new channels, right? You're probably more interested in finding, horizontal ways to scale as opposed to just vertically scaling the channels you've got. Affiliate partnerships become way easier to run and manage and attribute on web, which opens up more channel testing opportunities, right? And on top of this, you unlock new audiences on existing channels. Now, this is amazing for those with big ad spend. I think it's probably the most obvious audience expansion thing, right? And other people have spoken about this in the space, but I still don't think that people really understand this because a lot of people I've been speaking to, a lot of teams, growth teams, heads of growth aren't really aware of this. But when you set up a campaign, let's say we're setting up an app promotion campaign on Meta and a conversion campaign on Meta, I'm going to end up targeting different people, right? If I set the same settings, female, 30 plus, broad, right? As broad as female 30 plus gets, on both, I'm going to reach different people because it comes down to how the channels allocate inventory and how the algorithms work. Essentially, there are people out there who don't respond to trial campaigns, right? App promotion campaigns. They just don't engage with them. So Meta eventually is going to stop showing them those ads because they're not converting. Just like when I click, I want this, I want an app promotion campaign optimized for start trial, Meta doesn't give me a whole bunch of people who just install but don't take any action in apps. Same thing here, right? It identifies that there are some people who are responding a lot to these sales campaigns on web, but they aren't responding to app campaigns. Let me stop showing them. So there are pockets in each side of the fence that you can target by running campaigns specifically for them. So what you want to do at this stage is scale through web to app to unlock new reach and extend your campaigns, because you may be at a point or getting to the point where you can no longer scale your campaigns. The more you spend, you just see ROAS drop. And you're like, okay, we probably shouldn't spend. Let me drop my spend a little bit because I can't really spend at the moment. So you try and increase your spend on your direct to app campaign and it's not performing as well. So you reduce the spend and you see the right performance. What do? Are you just done? No, you can scale through web, right? So it's another thing that you can do. What about the cons? What stays the same? Now, analysis becomes increasingly a big problem, but you're increasingly equipped to solve it and throw resource at it, right? You can have multiple analysts dedicated to attribution and cross-platform analysis. It's no longer your growth manager, your head of growth who's, stressing, bleeding and sweating each night because they can't figure out how to create the right spreadsheets that your board are requesting. So it's not that much of a concern. ASO may or may not be a concern, but chances are at some point the organic traffic you're going to be getting is going to be largely brand traffic anyway, so that's not so much of a concern. Now, depending on your historically successful growth channels and how you've got to this stage, maybe it is going to be a big problem, but especially as you start getting to the 100 million a year, right, which like unicorn states, there aren't that many. Hey, I want to throw a caveat into this. When I say 100 million a year, I don't necessarily just mean from the app, because there are some businesses that have other elements of their business and have really big valuations and have an app and therefore have the resource and team available. I'm not just specifically talking about how much your app is generating at this stage, but more as a business. If your business is doing 100 million in annual recurring revenue and maybe only 3 million of that is from the app, still, it's probably going to be the case that you've got a big brand, a lot of people are familiar with your product, and a majority of your organic install volume is coming from brand. So that's what I mean there. Tax obligations, again, become increasingly difficult to manage, but you are increasingly equipped to handle them. So weigh that up as you will. Fraud prevention becomes more of a consideration too, but again, you can address these things. So I think it kind of becomes easier, and especially an easier decision to make of whether or not you should try it, because at this scale, the percentage saved on fees is probably going to be way higher than any increased cost in hiring people to work on these. There are, however, a few cons that come in that should also be thrown into the mix. The main one I want to touch on is localizing. Right, localizing your web funnel for different countries, and by that I mean pricing, language, content. App will make it pretty easy to do, at least on the pricing side. But if you're doing web, you're going to have to manage this yourself, so it becomes another thing for you to consider. And it's a little bit different there. And it means you're probably going to need a lot more people working on things. But chances are, regardless, at this stage, you're probably going to, like if we talk about language, you're going to be localizing anyway. You're going to have to localize your app content. You're going to have to localize your ad creatives. So there's not too much that's changing. But again, it is something to bear in mind. So, what is the verdict for large apps? Net, in my opinion, I think it's definitely something you should invest in and test. You need to run the numbers to figure out how beneficial this is going to be for you based on the additional cost, scaling opportunities, and fee reductions. But absolutely, you should be testing or have tested running web to app funnels alongside direct to app at this stage. I, hands down, do think that. So this has been a very long video, but let's conclude. Overall, there are pros and cons for web to app funnels on both sides, right? The benefits are really strong, and the cons, whilst painful, are definitely not overcomable. Now, you might be thinking, okay, are you trying to sell me some web to app product or service? No, I'm just giving my honest opinion on the pros and cons of web to app. I also think that the question needs another layer, right? We've spoken about different stage apps. The real question should be, as I mentioned at the beginning, will we be able to make web to app funnels profitable for our business and get better performance on web when compared to direct to app, or at least equal performance? Now that is a much deeper conversation, right? And depends on your market, product, audience, category. It's outside the scope of this video. But if you're a subscription app, most likely you should be testing web to app funnels to see if they work and to see how performance compares to direct to app. There are certain categories that I've just not seen web funnels work particularly well for, specifically like onboarding funnels. But as I said, there are other ways to test Web2App that aren't just those onboarding funnels, which we'll cover in later videos. But in short, if you're a subscription app, you should be testing Web2App funnels to see if they work for you. So I hope this video has been helpful. Please like and subscribe so that the channel can grow. Leave any questions or thoughts or contrary opinions in the comments and we can have a discussion. Hopefully this has helped your thinking around the right time to invest in web funnels for you. Take care.